Hello, friends. Welcome back. I'm Brad Wetzler, and this is the Enlightened-ish podcast. Last week, I talked about a pilgrimage I made to Arunachala, the great Shiva mountain in southern India. I told the story of my journey there, how I meditated in the caves that Ramana Maharshi had meditated in. I told the story of my 8-hour circumambulation around that great mountain and a prayer I'd made the night before all of that, a prayer to Shiva, a god I wasn't sure I even believed in. That journey to Arunachala led me to a place of humility. You might call it surrender. So this week, I want to kind of unpack that more. This week, I want to talk about a major lesson I learned from that pilgrimage and from all the spiritual travel I've done in my life. This episode, it's about listening. It's about stopping the doing, stopping the planning, stopping the going for it, just stopping and being quiet, seeing what information the universe, or maybe just your own heart, has for you. But let's go back to Arunachala for a minute. When I arrived at the mountain that day, I was exhausted. I had chased answers all over the world. I had been working my ass off to try to find answers to why I struggled with depression, to why I wanted to experience higher states of consciousness, even enlightenment. By then, I'd listened to this expert or that expert. I'd sat at the foot of swamis, lamas, gurus. I've been chasing experts and wisdom, chasing it all. But that morning, as I began my hike around the mountain, I was done. I was done trying to figure it out. I was done trying to think my way to healing or wholeness or individuation or enlightenment. What I didn't understand at that time was that I did have more wisdom than I knew. I was 52 years old, and I was one worldly guy. I'd earned a lot of hard-won wisdom. I'd survived several decades struggling with depression, all the way back to age 13 or 14. I'd survived a near tragic accident on a canoeing trip when I became trapped on a submerged log. I'd risen to senior editor at a major magazine and then fulfilled my dream of becoming a travel writer. I traveled around the world working as a journalist and adventure writer. I'd been to dozens of countries. I'd interviewed presidential politicians, billionaires, explorers, people who claimed to be the Messiah. And on a personal level, I'd sat in psychiatrist offices and therapist offices. I'd sought wisdom everywhere, but not in here. And I couldn't see that day. At that day, it felt desperate. I felt like I was punting fourth and long. But now I do see it differently. Some very wise part of me was speaking, telling me to slow down and listen, telling me to receive, to allow. Well, recently I found myself in a similar place. I felt the wisdom in my bones that I needed to do some listening. I'm talking about real listening, not a pause in the middle of the day, but taking some time. A few weeks ago, I had an important meeting with the editor of my memoir, and we discussed in detail the plan for my next draft. I was jazzed to start writing. I was clear intellectually about what I needed to do. But I also knew that I wasn't quite ready to start writing. I knew there was something to be gained from slowing down, spending time in nature, traveling, and yes, listening. And since foreign travel, my passion, wasn't available right now during the pandemic, I decided on a road trip. I knew where I wanted to go. It was a no-brainer. I wanted to go to New Mexico and Colorado. New Mexico had been my home for 20 years and Colorado for 10. The landscapes there feed my soul, my heart. I loaded the car. I picked up Madeline, my girlfriend, and she, my dog Tommy, and I hit the road. We headed north and west across the Texas flatlands. The first miles went slowly. By noon, it felt as if we hadn't escaped the gravitational pull of Austin, our hometown. But we kept driving, and by mid-afternoon, we were still in Texas, and the car began to heat up. The AC wasn't working right, and it was about 98 degrees outside and 60% humidity. As Madeline drove, I Googled. I discovered that I might have a dirty cabin filter. So, next stop, Lubbock, Texas, in the AutoZone to buy a new filter. I figured out how to replace it, and then we were back on the road, making our way towards New Mexico. By sunset, we'd crossed over the border, and the land began to look familiar to me, this land where I spent 20 years. We kept going north. We arrived in Santa Fe just after dark, and then Espanola, and then our first stopover, Abiquiu. The area around Abiquiu is famous for its red, pink, and orange rock. These colors, these images, these rocks made famous in the paintings of George O'Keeffe. It's the type of place that looks as magical in person as it does when it's painted by George O'Keeffe or somebody else. You know the type of picture, the pinkish red cliffs, the blue sky, a ladder flying across the sky or something like that, or a whole house. That's exactly what you might find there, in fact, when the wind gets blowing. But this place around Abiquiu is more than aesthetically pleasing. My body feels at rest there. My heart feels full, and my soul feels light and clear. It's something about the big open horizons, the grounding brown colors and the burnt umbers and the blue sky. It echoes the vastness that exists inside our own inner world. It's a land of contradictions, rich but stark, barren but colorful. The next morning, I woke suddenly after a disturbing dream. I was at a camp or some type of institution with many small buildings or cabins in this dream. A woman walked up to me and said that in one of the cabins there was a dead body. She asked me to come inspect it. I didn't feel nervous or anxious. When I got there, I was surprised to find that it was me on the floor. The dead body belonged to me. And she kept confirming that this body was dead, but I seemed to have some doubts. I definitely could see the dry bloodstains on the floor underneath the body, but the body was, though still and no breathing, it didn't seem totally dead. Let's say it seemed like 90% dead and 10% alive. I stood there, and then the woman took out a knife and plunged it into the body's chest. Then she reached into the thoracic cavity and she removed a very large human heart dripping with blood. She inspected the heart in an efficient manner, and then she carried it out of the room toward what she said was the office. I stood there, not in shock, really, just in kind of a bemused state. And then she was gone, and my heart was gone. I sat there that morning in Abiquiu, drinking coffee and writing about this dream. Occasionally, I looked over at Instagram on my phone. On a site dedicated to writers and artists, I stumbled on a quotation that spoke to me. It said this: "If you opened us up, you'd find landscapes." The quote was by a French director, a woman named Agnes Vardas. Now that's something to ponder. If you opened us up, you'd find landscapes. And get this, I just watched my own heart removed from my chest. Just then, Madeline walked into the restaurant and we began talking and we ordered breakfast and we sat down to plan the day's adventure. We planned to drive north to a dirt road turnoff, a 13-mile dirt road that follows the Chama River into the deep backcountry. It winds along all the way to a Franciscan monastery where 60 monks lived. The monastery is called Christ in the Desert. It was a very special place to me, a place that I've gone on silent retreat several times to write and to clear the kinks out of my head, to connect with nature, maybe God. We parked out front and strolled the monastery grounds. I mentioned a dream to Madeline and the quote. The monastery is located at the bottom of a sheer cliff and within a stone's throw, really, of the Chama River. It's a most extraordinarily beautiful remote place, and I've envied the monks that live there. As I said, I've stayed there when I've needed to sort out my mind and to step back into the things that are essential to who I am. We can't always go to monasteries in the remote backcountry, but we can do some things to stay in our heart and to listen. This is what spiritual practices do for me, the yoga and the meditation and the journal writing that I do. One way to think of these activities is spiritual. It's connecting with something deeper in ourselves or greater than ourselves, something essential about ourselves. But another way to think about these practices is simple self-care. These things keep me grounded, centered, and therefore more capable of living a good, prosperous, and decent life. But another way to think about them is that they keep me in my heart. They keep me from devolving into an asshole who reacts fast and hard to things that bother me. These practices keep me conscious. Maybe they do increase my consciousness, but that's our work. You know, when I first began a spiritual path, it was a different experience than I have now. At the time, I was filled with great enthusiasm and joy that I'd found a path inward. I felt bursts of ecstatic joy at the realization that I'd been missing out on such a vital, interesting, fulfilling aspect of being a human being, this inner life. I'd spent the previous decades engrossed in our scientific, materialistic view of the universe only. And while, yes, I appreciate and listen to science, I'm now aware that there's so much more going on inside ourselves and in this universe. Later, reality struck. I could still taste the joy and ecstasy of this new spiritual path, but I became aware of the ways that I was avoiding seeing reality as it really was. I began to think, how could I be so joyous when I had so much inner work to do, so many things to fix about myself, to get my personality and my deeper essence in alignment. And we as a culture had so much to do to fix the world, to fix our nation, to dismantle racism, to try to do away with class warfare and economic inequity. That part of the path turned me into a bit of a grumpy spiritual person. But lately, things have shifted again. Most recently, I've been focusing on recognizing when the thinking brain isn't really needed and can be sort of switched off or turn the volume down. Sort of noticing when using logical arguments don't always serve us, like being in relationship with somebody or writing something important and deep, and realizing that we do have access to another way of being, that we can drop into our hearts. But what does that mean, this word heart? Poets love it, but what is the heart? I thought it was just a pump inside our chest. I decided to do a little research. The heart is the area of the chest, but it's not just a pump of blood. In 1991, a doctor discovered that the heart has a little brain or intrinsic cardiac nervous system. This heart brain is composed of approximately 40,000 neurons that are like the neurons in the brain, meaning that the heart has its own nervous system. In addition, the doctor said the heart communicates with the brain in many different ways, neurologically, biochemically, biophysically, and energetically. The vagus nerve carries information from the heart and other internal organs to the brain. Signals from the heart brain redirect to the medulla, hypothalamus, the thalamus, the amygdala, and the cerebral cortex. So the heart actually sends more signals to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. Research has demonstrated that pain perception is modulated by neural pathways. On and on. The heart is not just a pump, it is a little brain. Moreover, besides neurons, the heart area and the chest is full of muscles and blood vessels. When we move into our hearts, the muscles expand and the blood vessels open. There's a physiological change. When we listen, this is where we want to be, in our heart. And sometimes it takes a road trip. When we pause and listen, we can be awakened by forces greater than ourselves. You know, the ego doesn't always know what's best. We have to listen to the intelligence of the heart. It reminds me of Gandhi. The great spiritual and political leader of India used to take one day off per week to pray and observe and hold a sense of holy quiet, no matter what was happening in the struggle for rights against the occupying British. Sometimes, on his day off, somebody would knock on his door and tell him that he was really needed because something important needed his attention. Gandhi would simply explain that this was his day off for contemplation and rest, and that he needed the day to remain silent and holy in order that he could show up for his people fully on the other days. This was non-negotiable. Here's something weird but true. When we are in our hearts, we are actually further along in the spiritual path. And guess what's also true? We are most in our animal selves. That's right. Author Susan Aposhian puts it like this: the unitive state, when we are most liberated, realized, enlightened, or connected to God, is exactly like being in a raw state of nature. So get this, enlightenment doesn't look like a half-starved yogi in a cave at the top of the mountain. It looks more like a cow in a pasture in Texas. Go figure. Please check out my website where you can learn about my podcast, my courses in memoir writing, free online yoga classes, and more. I'll end with the following chant. May all beings everywhere be happy and free, and may the thoughts, words, and actions of my own life contribute in some small way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. Have a good week. This is Brad Wetzler, and this was Enlightened-ish.